Welcome to Toxicology, brought to you by Recovery Unplugged, the place where we talk about all things substance abuse, recovery, and mental health, with guests offering varying perspectives and viewpoints. Hosts Joseph Gordo and Jason Cabello share about their addiction and recovery and other serious subject matter through lighthearted yet candid conversation.
Toxicology, we are rolling. Welcome, everybody, to another exciting episode of Toxicology, the latest and greatest podcast in the known universe on recovery, addiction, mental health, music, and kind of whatever comes to mind any given week. I'm sure you just finished hearing our canned intro where it says you're joined by your host, myself, and my co-host, Jason, but as you can see, Jason is not here today. As my 12-year-old would say, womp womp. So yeah, you just get me. So all you little Jason fangirls and fanboys out there, if you want to skip this episode, I won't hold it against you. But you shouldn't, because we have a really exciting guest this week. Rather than bore you all with my rantings and musings on life, the universe, and everything, I think we're just going to jump right into it this week. So without any further ado, I give you Stephanie from Killjoy.
Hello.
Hello. And Stephanie, I've read your last name about a bajillion times over the past week or so, and I've never attempted to pronounce it. I forgot to ask you before we got on.
Yeah, it's just pronounced Still. The Y is like an I. Okay,
that's how it sounded in my head. So first off, welcome all the way from Nashville. Yeah. Are you
I'm here, but I'm sad that Jason's not here.
Oh, Jason is the better half of the duo. I'm not even gonna lie. But so are you in Nashville proper?
Yes.
Yes? Oh, okay. See, I don't meet a lot of people from Nashville proper. It's kind of turning into one of those cities where people are like, oh yeah, I'm from Nashville, but they're actually from like Brentwood or, one of the little suburbs.
We were just talking about that, how people who are, if you live in Nashville and you like are outside of Nashville, don't say you live in Nashville because it's confusing.
Yeah. And you know what? It's kind of like that with most major cities, right? Like here in Austin, I live in the suburbs. I live in Cedar Park. But if someone asks me, I say I'm from Austin.
Right. Because I don't know where Cedar Park is.
But I was born here, so I can claim it, So I guess let's start there. Are you born and bred Nashville, Tennessean?
I was born in California, but we moved to Nashville when I was about 8 years old. So I grew up in Nashville, so it definitely feels like home.
Yeah, awesome. And I love exploring people's kind of, their upbringings and their childhood experience, as kind of like, does this lead to alcoholism, addiction? Is there any kind of roots there, that kind of whole thing? So, what was your home life growing up? Both, when you say we moved to Nashville, right? Who's we? Siblings, parents, together, not together, just all of it.
Yeah. So my parents are married. They are still married. And I have two older brothers. So I'm the youngest in the family. There were 5 of us that moved to Nashville. Yeah, that's our family unit. My parents were not big drinkers. We moved here because my dad was in the Christian music industry.
So not an alcohol-laden industry at all.
Not that I ever saw.
Maybe behind closed doors. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't evident to me as a child. I didn't really see people drinking.
So, Toxicology as a podcast is our primary sponsor is Recovery Unplugged, which is a alcohol and drug treatment center where I work at and Jason works at. So growing up, I mean, with your dad being in the music industry, although a more subdued, godly version of the music industry, were you exposed to a lot of any alcohol, anything like that?
I really wasn't. I remember asking my parents when we were out, like, hey, when people are like smoking cigarettes, what are they doing? And my parents were like, just don't do that. It's bad. And that was kind of what they told me about everything. Like, just don't do that. It's bad. So of course, like the first chance I had to drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, whatever, I was all over it. Oh
yeah. And that's a huge trap. I don't know if you have kids. I have kids.
I have a 4-year-old.
You have a 4-year-old? Awesome. So, but that's a huge thing, right? It's like, if by avoiding the topic and just saying like, oh no, just don't do it.
Yeah.
do we end up encouraging folks to, when they have the opportunity, to just kind of go wild, right?
Well, and I had no guidance. So I think like the first time I drank beer, I had like 3 warm natural ices that I just pounded and then I threw up. It was disgusting and awful, and I have no idea what possessed me to think, "Oh, I should probably keep doing this all the time."
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't have anything elegant to look up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I like to talk about is kind of the ism before the alcohol, right? This idea that, there's some kind of underlying thing going on, whether it be trauma or mental health or whatever it may be. When you look back on your history, do you see anything prior to the alcohol really taking hold where you can say, like, you know what, like this is something that, helps drive my alcohol use? Or
Not really. I mean, my childhood was very typical, not necessarily traumatic. I mean, I was always with people who were older than me because I was the youngest, and I had older brothers, and they also were experimenting with alcohol and pot and things like that. But I think I wanted to fit in, but I think more than anything, not understanding my own hormones and what was going on with me as a teenager drove me to not want to be in my body.
do you feel like that was kind of also as a result of kind of that Christian upbringing of like, let's not talk about this kind of more uncomfortable stuff?
Potentially, and not even necessarily from my parents, but like my mom was so naive. Like I don't think she knew very much. Her parents didn't tell her anything, and she just lived in this very sheltered world, got married when she was like 17 years old. I don't think she had ever drank alcohol, and she certainly didn't know much about like female hormones. Like I'm 43 years old. And in the past 3 years, I have learned so much about how my body works. It's been incredible.
Listen,
and I'm like, God, if I would have learned this when I was 13, this could have changed everything.
oh man, so I turned 40 next year. No, next year. I'm lying. I turned 40 in the summer. And my wife has recently been educating me on all these things I didn't know about women and hormones, and like the luteal phase and the whatever phase, the follicular phase. That's the other.
Nobody ever mentioned this before 5 years ago.
No.
Nobody gave a shit what was going on with women, to be honest.
Absolutely. And Jason and I talk about it a lot, because, I'm almost 40. I want to say Jason's 48. But how, growing up in the, 80s to the early 90s, like we didn't talk about, depression, anxiety, addiction, alcoholism. There weren't things that were discussed aside from, did you do DARE when you were a kid?
Yes.
Yes. My oldest is 14, and, they very much have like words, they have this language in the vernacular where, you can tell that mental health is talked about. But yeah, we grew up pretty naive about a lot of this stuff.
Oh, completely. And I think, you just for me, I started struggling like hormonally, feeling depressed, feeling weird in my body, which is a really normal thing for a teenage girl to be going through. And I didn't want to feel like that. And I thought, well, alcohol could probably change this.
And you probably just thought like, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah, of course.
When do you start experimenting with alcohol? When is it that you drink the 3 room temperature High Lifes?
I don't know. It's maybe 14.
Okay, so pretty standard age and for experimenting, right? So as you progress in your life, where do you start to see the alcohol start to kind of go beyond what one might consider typical use?
I don't know that I ever had that point, to be honest, because like everything that I did was totally aligned with what everybody else was doing. In general, I would have, of course, nights when I was in college when I would black out and not remember or whatever. And then the next day, everybody would tell me, oh, blah, 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 this happened. It was so funny, that kind of a thing. But it wasn't like it was just me or anybody said, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. It was just like what people were doing.
So that's actually really fascinating to me, right? When you talk about kind of your use fell within the social norms of whatever kind of stage in life you're at, right? Because, obviously if you're in your 40s and you're blacking out, a couple times a week, not normal. College, Probably, right? I read in your bio that you spent a good amount of time in Germany. Were you able to keep up with the German drinking culture?
I was. I mean, so I became pretty adept at drinking. And I always enjoyed drinking socially, and I always had a group of friends that were drinkers. And of course, in Germany, there's a lot of drinking. But I was also very responsible.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it was something that kept me drinking for such a long time, was the fact that like I never could classify it as a problem or as necessarily different than what other people were doing.
So most folks in recovery, myself included, right? I will sometimes talk about like, hey, I never really stopped liking alcohol and drugs. I just realized that the problems it created for me and what it did for me just wasn't worth it anymore, right? Because I have all the stories, right? The DUIs and getting arrested and all that kind of stuff. So I guess my burning question is, if you were able to drink socially and never really had it grow into like these bigger life problems that we typically associate with recovery, what drove you to stop drinking?
Basically starting to do a lot of self-discovery things and reading books and like learning kind of the idea that, hey, you don't have to be an alcoholic to stop drinking, which I think was like, oh shit. Like, because I think the model that we know is you don't stop until something really horrible happens.
Absolutely.
You don't have to stop. The only people who stop are the ones who have to.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that's very much the norm.
That's what I had in my mind. And I think when I started reading books and thinking about it, I was like, well, maybe I could just stop drinking. Like maybe I don't have to be doing this. Maybe I don't have to be on this loop of drinking on the weekends and kind of feeling like crap. And I was always trying to like run marathons and do yoga. And it's just, like fighting a hangover so I could get up and go for a run and drinking, and it just really didn't feel aligned. I didn't like a lot of the things that I did when I was drinking. I never kept the promises I was making to myself. And I didn't know how to get off that hamster wheel. So I think I became like sober curious, probably around 2015. And that was when I moved back to Nashville. So I was in Germany I was overseas for about 14 years.
Oh, wow. So you moved back to Nashville and and I don't think we had the term sober curious yet in 2015.
No.
But so like, you mentioned books, what kind of stuff were you reading that was making, kind of putting this on your radar?
I'm not totally sure, to be honest, because at the time, like, I don't know what, but I used to go to the library and just like get whatever. I love reading self-help and professional development kind of books. So I would just get like whatever they had at the library, and something put this into my mind. And then I think the book that really like got me going, I want to do this was, that probably came out, I don't know when, in 2018 or so, but was The Snake in Mind.
The Snake in Mind. Interesting.
Do you know that book?
No, I've never heard of this one.
Oh, you should. It's very interesting. So it's, she basically starts off saying like, here's the easy way to quit drinking, and which ends in like, you can't drink at all. But in it, she breaks down how if you can change your mindset around alcohol, it can be really easy to stop drinking, and you don't have to be an alcoholic to do this. Just anybody can quit drinking. And if alcohol is not serving you, then you should try it.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, when you were talking about like trying to run marathons and balance that with like, oh, I've got this hangover and I've got my long weekend run that I got to do for training or whatever it may be, like that is very similar to the culture in Austin, right? Austin is a very health conscious city. Yoga shops on every corner, all that kind of stuff, but also a very hard partying city to where that's the whole joke is that, people in Austin can run a 10K after a night of drinking and then have a beer at the Finish Line Festival, right?
Yeah. Oh, and it's super common.
And a lot of people, we talk about a lot how Nashville is very much like what Austin was maybe 10, 15 years ago, just a little smaller, less corporate takeover version of Austin. So you start getting curious in 2015, you mentioned reading this book around 2018. But I believe 2020 is when you actually pulled the trigger or the ripcord on giving sobriety a shot. Yeah.
Well, I did a lot of practicing.
Tell me about
like
the practice runs.
So like I do remember at the beginning of 2018, I was like, all right, I'm going to see how long I can go without drinking, and that was
Did
a
like a
good
dry
one.
January kind of deal?
I made it 4.5 months, I think. And so I did a lot of stints like that where I kind of practiced is what I think of it as. And then what was interesting is that I'd almost always fall back into the same patterns that I had been in.
Like as soon as you picked up a drink, you'd find yourself right back.
I mean, not necessarily that, but the same, usually drinking more than I intended to, because you try to set up like rules for yourself. Like, okay, well, I'm just going to have a drink on Friday night, but then there's this thing on Wednesday and then this is happening. And so just drinking, telling myself I was going to do one thing and then a different thing actually happening.
Absolutely. As an addict, I can absolutely identify with that, right? I'm only going to do cocaine once a month, right? Or I'm only going to drink or do this, and it never worked out that way.
There's a lot of mental gymnastics, and I see, and everybody does this. They do this because people know that you shouldn't be drinking a bunch all the time. A lot of people are doing this. Oh, well, I'll have a glass of water after every one or whatever.
So when you would have these practice runs of sobriety, when 4.5 months in, what would end up being the reason that you decided to have a drink again? Were you doing those gymnastics for like a month and just finally like gave yourself permission? Was it, what drove those kind of slips back away from what the goal you had set for yourself?
I don't know exactly. Usually maybe like a special occasion or something like that, or be like, well, I mean, I know when my husband and I we just like wound up in wine country in Northern California. And I hadn't had a drink in like 4 months. And I was like, we're in wine country. Of course I'm going to have
to.
Like,
Absolutely.
I can't be here and not do this. And that just like, I couldn't. So I do know that traveling is a big trigger for me because I want to like experience the thing when I'm in the place.
Yeah. And most places, I know that my wife is a normie, so she drinks. And, most places you go, there's like the alcohol you drink when you're there, right?
Yeah.
You're in Mexico, you have a margarita. You're in Russia, not that I've been to Russia, but, you got to have the vodka, or you're driving through wine country, right? And I can confirm for you and for our viewers at home that it is absolutely possible to drive through Napa Wine Valley up in California and not drink any wine. I did it myself during the pandemic. Scary roads up there. Everything's very windy up in Napa. And so you have your test runs, and then 2020 is when you actually do it, right?
The end of 2020.
At the end of 2020.
Yeah. I had a baby in 2019, I had a baby. And so in 2020, the beginning of the year, I have a newborn child at home, and I'm working at a nonprofit that does disaster relief. And in March, we had a massive tornado come right through Nashville.
Yes.
So I was working, 14-hour days responding to this tornado. It was super stressful. And then we all got sent home for the pandemic.
Yes, for 2 weeks.
And of course, we're at home. Our child is at this point 5-6 months old. So it's a pretty easy age to get away with drinking because the kid's sleeping a lot, doesn't really know what's going on. We're not leaving the house.
So I some wine, cooking lunch, right? Just everything can get delivered, right?
The drinking definitely ramped up for a few months, and it was like, okay, I feel like garbage. My 40th birthday is approaching. I've been trying to kick this thing for 5 years now. It's time. It is time. So I quit on my 40th birthday.
Did you have your last drink when you were 39 and 364 days? Or was your 40th birthday the last hurrah?
I actually quit for a few months before that, but the idea of not drinking on my 40th birthday, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. So I went out, drank basically as much as I could. And then the next day I said, all right, this is it. This is the end. I'm not doing it anymore. Felt totally hungover, felt like garbage. But that was it. I was serious.
So was part of you like let me drink as much as possible so I can feel as crappy as possible tomorrow morning to even further cement my decision to do this?
Yeah, I think I'm just kind of like that. I decided, so the thing I've been struggling with now 3.5 years later, and today is 3.5 years actually, because it's my half birthday.
Congratulations on your
Thank you.
3.5 years.
Is sugar. I still just eat way too much sugar. And on Sunday, I was like, all right, tomorrow on April 1st, I'm gonna like really I'm changing the sugar situation. So of course it was Easter and it was like cake and cookies.
Oh yeah,
and
there's
candy.
lots of sugar
I
on
was like,
Easter.
well, I'll just eat as much sugar as I possibly can since I'm not going to moving forward.
Yes.
It makes sense to me somehow.
Yeah. So you quit for good and for all on your 40th birthday. You know, a lot of people think, operate under this delusion, right? That, if they have a problem with alcohol, or they have a problem with drugs or whatever it may be, that once they put that thing down, that solving that single problem will solve all the other problems, right? Which in my experience is not true, right? So what were those first few months like in recovery? Did you find yourself challenged? Did you find yourself seeking out extra supports? Did other things like the sugar kind of become more problematic?
I think what you said is true, but drinking was the biggest thing. Drinking was the first thing that had to go, the first few months were messy, I didn't feel good. People are like, oh, do dry January in 30 days. You'll feel like a different person. I definitely in 30 days was not just like better, but it led me on a journey of like, all right, what do I need to do? And I had been working on this for years. Like, how do I optimize my sleep? How do I manage my stress? Like, so I already had a lot of tools in my toolkit that I was using. Because I knew, that this this moment was coming. And for me, the biggest thing was really getting my mindset wrapped around like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't want to drink. Right now, I'm not like itching for a drink. I wouldn't have a drink right now if you paid me. And so really getting that into my mind. The next step was getting my body to agree and to cooperate. And I think a lot of people, when they quit drinking, they discover, oh, I have other like physical problems.
Yes, absolutely.
And I didn't necessarily have those, but I definitely, something that I have struggled with and how I went on this journey was like my hormones were out of whack. And so I definitely was like, how can I learn everything that I can learn about what is going on with my body so that I can start to get everything into alignment? And I would say at about a year, I started to feel significantly better.
Really? So for that whole first year, you found yourself just not 100% physically?
Probably.
Yeah. And at what point do you decide, I guess you didn't just immediately decide like, I'm going to open up a place called Killjoy, right? I'm sure there was a journey involved there too, So I guess kind of tell me a little bit about that. What led to the decision to found what we now know as Killjoy?
And actually, let me go back to one other thing, because you asked before something about like what triggered you to start drinking again in all of those situations.
Yes.
And I think environment is a big part of it. And every time that I would go back and drink, my friends would be like, oh, I'm so glad you're drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure a lot of people experience this because people think if you don't drink, then you suck. And I think that is something that kept me from wanting to quit. Because I didn't want to be the wet blanket. I didn't want to be the killjoy.
Yeah.
And after about a year, you realize like, oh my God, I was totally wrong about what this would be like.
Mm-hmm.
This is the adventure. This is where you feel joy. This is where you taste life. And like, there's a lot of people who don't drink and they're great people. And I was like, why are there not more places where there's not alcohol? And the other thing was I really started to learn about alcohol alternatives. I had never experimented with them before. I didn't know much about them. And I think that coincided with the quality and quantity of alcohol alternatives out there just kind of exploding. And for me, alcohol alternatives are amazing because I want to be a part of stuff. Like I hate missing out on stuff and I want to go to a party and I want to have a glass of champagne in my hand. And now I can do that. I can go to a party, I can maintain my integrity, do what I want to do, drink something delicious, participate in the ritual, drive myself home and sleep like a baby. And so I just thought, these are incredible and we need to figure out how to make this more mainstream. And to find them at the time, I had to drive to like every liquor store in town. And if you're a person who's trying to quit drinking, like going to every liquor store in town is not recommended. So I kept thinking, what, gosh, if there could be a place where you could go, and more than what I even have now, which is a retail shop and we do events, like I kept thinking there should be like a bar, there should be a space, a dedicated space where people can go and hang out, and there's no alcohol.
Yeah, I love it. And, one thing that's very interesting is, you mentioned wanting to be a part of the ritual, right? And looking back on my recovery, when I first got sober, everybody I hung out with was in recovery, right? So I didn't get the stigma of like, oh, you're not drinking, right? But the older I got and the older my kids got, we start, having, I'm being forced to socialize, right? And yes, make friends with the PTA moms and the going to little neighborhood things and you'll learn this one, but as your kids get older, you really got to find their friends hopefully will have parents that you get along with, because you can. And more and more I started finding myself in situations where people were drinking. I was in non-recovery spaces, and very often would find myself, sometimes people would be very sweet and accommodating, and they'd buy some, here in Texas, we have the Topo Chico mineral water. That's, for a long time been the drink of choice for the sober crowd. They'd be like, oh, I bought you some Topo Chicos. They're right over there for you. But not always the case. And even when they would do that, right, I would still sometimes feel separate from what everybody else is, and having to do some work around, making sure I wasn't being, as you put it, a killjoy, right? Because, man, it's 10 o'clock. Everybody's getting a little past the line of drunkenness that's fun for me. I'd like to go home, which doesn't always work out. And there is kind of this whole movement going on right now. A friend of the show, Chris Marshall, he started an organization here in Austin called Sands Bar. They just do pop-up kind of mocktail events at different...
He came and did one at Killjoy last year.
There you go. So, Chris is one of my favorite people. He's a great guy. And I think he, part of his story is that once he started doing this in Austin, like, I guess he kind of just started doing it at the right time where, someone from Oregon reached out to him, and then someone from California reached out to him, just, wanting to learn more about how to do this. But you took it kind of one step further into actually having, this dedicated retail space. And I mentioned community earlier, right? So in checking out your socials, it seems like your shop really focuses a lot on events, building community, and creating kind of a space for folks. Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, like I said, from the beginning, I recognized the need for a space, but rent in Nashville is astronomical.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I don't have a background in hospitality at all. So, retail is just the reality of what it ended up being. We started doing pop-ups. We started with just doing pop-up parties. And then I found this little spot. And so, I mean, we're basically like inside of a closet, but we've made it work. There's a shared community space where we can use to host events. So that's what we do. And we've hosted over 75 events. We just reached 1 year.
That's amazing.
So it's been huge. We've just people are looking for a place to go that doesn't have alcohol. And, AA is intimidating. And I think a lot of people feel like I did, which is like, that's not really the right place for me. And I went to some AA meetings when I first quit drinking, and I was just like, this doesn't resonate with me.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew it wasn't the right place for me. And I think there's a really big spectrum of people right now who are sober curious, of really questioning their relationship with alcohol, looking for community.
Historically, right, people have always viewed AA as like, that's where you go. And as you mentioned earlier, right, that's where you go when you have a problem with drinking. If you want to stop for any other reason, you probably don't fit in there. And, I'll be sober. It'll be 16 years this summer. In that time, I've gotten to see, people who just put it down and walked away, people who do AA, people who do NA, people who find themselves born again Christian, people who do it through yoga, all kinds of different approaches. But the one that seems to kind of get the old school people kind of up in arms is what you're talking about. This idea that, you don't have to be this super problematic person who's admitting powerlessness over alcohol to pursue a sober life. And I'm sure, have you experienced pushback from the recovery community in your journey?
I really have not. I almost expected it because I do think I'm taking kind of a different view of the whole thing. But in general, I think what I have found is that I've found there's a lot more people, so many people who are like, oh, I'm thinking about quitting drinking. I don't know where I fit in, but I can go to a Killjoy happy hour. We don't ask people, there's no format. You don't have to tell your story. You don't have to be sober. You don't have to talk about anything. The only thing is we don't have alcohol at our events.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's pretty much it.
So what do you say to folks who say that, like, drinking a non-alcoholic whiskey that is, tastes pretty close to the real thing, when people, I'm sure people have opinions about that, right? That, that it's not good for someone in early recovery to do that, or that it's just asking for trouble, or kind of what's your response to those sort of?
My response is every person needs to know it works for them. For some people, it may not be triggering to have a non-alcoholic beer, but drinking a non-alcoholic wine may be triggering. You have to know that for yourself. I can't know that for you. For me, drinking non-alcoholic drinks is the opposite of triggering. And I think for a lot of people, it is a wonderful gateway into what it feels like to not drink.
I love that.
My husband is an interesting example of that because I didn't ask him to stop drinking, but he was a heavy drinker. And he decided after a while that he didn't really want to drink so much anymore. And he probably drank 6 non-alcoholic beers every night for like a year.
Uh-huh.
He did the exact same thing that he was doing with beer. Like before that, he would come home and crack open a beer. He'd just come home, crack open a non-alcoholic beer until he was like, well, this is kind of dumb. And he just kind of stopped. I mean, then he'll have one when he goes to a party or something. But like when you take away the benefit of being drunk from it, eventually like the reward is gone. So the behavior just kind of tapers off.
Yeah. It's like, why am I drinking 6 of this thing?
Yeah, but he needed it for the beginning.
Yeah. To like kind of,
that's what he was used to.
Keep that ritual, keeping that ritual going until he was ready to let it go.
Keep doing it. And when he got together with his friends, he had something in his hand. And, people don't even know what non-alcoholic beers look like because they look like craft beers now. There's a million kinds of beers, so you can be pretty incognito too. Absolutely. Which I think a lot of people need.
Absolutely. I remember the first time I showed up with a Liquid Death water and my family just being, wait, what did you just buy at the gas station? Because a lot of the branding is pretty in line with what you see with most beers, right?
Yeah.
Something cool that I've seen here in Austin, and it's probably pretty similar in Nashville, is that most restaurants I go to nowadays, not like your Chili's or Applebee's or anything, but like actual restaurants. No hate to Chili's or Applebee's. But more and more I'm finding that when I look at the drink menu, there's a little box that says non-alcoholic options. And yeah, you still got your sodas and your milkshake or whatever, but more and more I'm seeing mocktails on the menu, which I think is really, really cool. Now, one thing that I've seen here locally is mocktails that have little asterisks next to their name, where it'll say, this contains CBD or it contains, XYZ herb or mushroom that's gonna make you feel a little something, but not alcohol, but it won't feel like alcohol, right? So I personally, I stay away from those, anything that's gonna kind of make me feel, change the way my brain feels or my body feels. What are your thoughts on those non-alcoholic spirits that are now coming on the market? They do contain something mood altering.
Well, first of all, I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen around adaptogens because adaptogens are really being hyped as mood altering, and a lot of them are not very mood altering. Now, THC, CBD, kava is mood altering, and I sell that stuff in my shop. For me personally, I have dabbled with it. It's never been something that did much for me. You know what I mean? I loved the feeling of drinking alcohol. I don't really like the feeling of being high, so it's not a problem for me. That's me personally. I keep them in the shop because I do think it helps a lot of people reduce how much alcohol they're drinking. If they can go and have a drink that's got a little THC in it and they get a little buzz from it and they go all night without drinking and they make it another week without drinking, then I'm happy for them. Is that good for everyone? Does that mean you're sober? I just think at this point, we have such a spectrum and everyone's on their own journey. That is totally up to people. But I do think as far as drinks with like adaptogens and botanicals and mushrooms and stuff like that, not a lot of them do a lot. Like people are maybe, they come in and they're like, are these drinks going to give me a buzz? And I'm like, kind of. I mean, you basically have to take ashwagandha for like a month for it to make you feel like a little bit of a mood improvement. Like they're being generous with how things are being described, I think. But I have learned a lot about different adaptogens and their different functions. And like, I do think, for example, cordyceps mushrooms really give me a good amount of energy. And I don't drink caffeine anymore either.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about some heavy stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. I quit drinking. Well, this was part of the journey. About a year in, I was like, how can I feel better? And I read, caffeine can mess with estrogen. And I thought, well, I'm going to give that a try. And I love coffee. Love it. But you know what I do? I drink decaf. I drink like a huge French press of decaf every morning by myself.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
And you know what? I drink beer in the morning. I drink coffee at night. I've gamed the system. I feel good all the time. I do whatever I want. I love it.
I'm actually drinking a sparkling water with 35 milligrams of caffeine in it right now.
Damn. Yeah.
As I'm kind of thinking about it, I think I'm very much with caffeine where you were with alcohol. I don't sleep well, so then I drink more caffeine to make up for it, which kind of perpetuates the cycle. And then I try to find like the perfect time/dosage of caffeine for the afternoon slump that's going to get me through the rest of the day.
Try a mushroom drink with cordyceps.
Well, my wife just got something. It's like a little powder and you put it in your drink and it's a matcha tea that has
L-theanine,
cordyceps and lion's mane and reishi, and there's like 7 different mushrooms in there that do 7 different things, and I haven't taken the time to learn and read what all these mushroom things do.
It's exciting. I mean, I think as we learn more about it, people can really start to dial in like, oh, I want to feel good and I want to be in a good mood. And so like for me, okay, I have to go to a party and I have to be social and I'm really tired after a long day. I can have one of these drinks that I know has something that's going to give me a tiny bit of energy. And that to me is not at all the same. It's not a head change.
Yeah.
And it's not as strong as even caffeine. That's why people are like, oh, should I dabble in this stuff? It's like, it's pretty weak.
Yeah, it's baby stuff.
Not all of it. So that's the thing is you kind of have to know. You have to know more about it. And I've definitely been getting an education over the past year in what all of these different things do.
That's awesome. I think I saw something on your Instagram that you guys are partnering with Four Loko, or was that an April Fool's joke?
I'm drinking it all the time.
Four Loko.
It's an April Fool's joke. It's completely.
Okay. I saw it and it had me for a minute, and then I was like, wait, when was this post?
Totally fake. Sorry about that.
So
I know you wanted it. I know you wanted all the Four Loko flavor with none of the alcohol or caffeine.
I got sober before Four Loko was a thing, so I'm like, and every now and then something comes along that I'm just like, man, they couldn't have invented that, 18 years ago. And I could.
I mean, it's kind of the same concept as Red Bull and vodka. So it's energy drink plus alcohol. And I was in Europe for the whole thing, so I missed it too. But just the cultural opportunity to make something ridiculous like that, we couldn't pass up on it.
No, it was great. I mean, if Four Loko reached out to you and actually wanted to do it, I think the branding works.
We'll see.
So, what has been the most surprising thing that you've learned in your journey over the past 3.5 years?
I think I've been surprised by how well, and I told you after the first year, just realizing how much joy there is in not drinking. And I mean, it's better. It's like undisputably better in every way. And I work in this shop where people come in and tell me the same thing. They echo this. It's not just me. Like, people's lives are changed completely for the better when they give up alcohol. They don't miss it. They're not sad. They're not missing out. And I think that was my perception before. It was so hard to give up because I thought I would be missing out on something. And I really realize now, like, I'm not missing out on anything.
Absolutely. If anything, I feel sometimes being sober, you know, you don't miss out on anything. And also, like, you get to have all the memories.
Oh, it's the best. You can drive home. You can just do whatever you want.
So what's next for Killjoy? You know, y'all just celebrated your 1 year of being open. You know, are there big plans in the works? Or are we still just sticking to one shop? What's next?
We're working on two kind of big things. Number one would be moving to a different location. Like I said, we're in a real small space. And our friends, there's a coffee shop where we are, and the guy that runs the coffee shop has been a friend of mine for 25 years, which is how I ended up in the space, and they're moving. So we are looking for a place together that we can turn into a coffee shop / mocktail bar / retail store. So it would be, a place to go in the evenings, most nights, every night, where you can hang out and there won't be booze.
Have you heard of this concept of a third place?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of as you're talking. It's like, oh, well, that's like a third place for sober people, right?
Yeah. And I mean, and for anyone, because, I went to Austin and I had my friend take me to a bunch of places because Austin really has this model of like bar coffee shop.
Yes.
That we don't have in Nashville. Our coffee shops all close at 3:00 in the afternoon.
I've noticed that.
It's very weird.
Coming in for work with Recovery Unplugged, I've had my fair share of trips to Nashville, and yes, you can't get coffee late at night. We've got 24-hour coffee shops that also serve beer.
Yeah. So that's what I want is like, not only does it need to be, I think a mocktail bar would be fun, but like a late night coffee shop, just a place to go that's not a bar. But I also kind of want it to feel a little bit like a bar, like I want it to feel vibey, not like you're walking into a Starbucks.
Yeah, shuffleboard table on one wall, darts.
Yeah, so that's hopefully coming soon, and we're going to start a Killjoy podcast.
Love it. Well, if you need any podcast tips, we've been doing this for a couple. I wouldn't say we're the best at it, but we have a good time.
Yeah, definitely. We just got StreamYard because I was like, hey, check out this platform.
Yeah, StreamYard is when we first started the show during the pandemic still. And it was when Hulu was doing that show Dope Sick. So I think it was probably like 21 where we were kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the pandemic. Yeah. And we did it all through StreamYard. It was great. And the only thing I miss about that format versus actually doing it in the studio is, we used to go live the same date and time every week. And we had, our viewers who would hop on every week and interact with us. And we can't really do that in this format anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, StreamYard's wonderful. All right. Well, we're getting towards the end of our time. So it is now, brings us to rapid fire question time.
It's rapid fire question time.
Let's play.
Let's go. 5 questions real quick. What is the opposite of Killjoy?
The word or the place? This is a fast answer, right?
Open to interpretation.
I don't know. That's too hard. Ask another one.
All right. Question 2, time travel vacation. You can go back to any time, place, era in history. Where do you go and why?
I don't know. Paris, 1920s. Just so romantic.
Okay. Right on. In between the world wars, right?
Yeah, kind of. There was this time where there was a lot of like writers there. It's like a very romanticized time. There's a Woody Allen movie about it because the guy wants to go back there. But then when he goes back there, she wants to go back to the Belle Epoque or whatever. So nobody's ever happy in the time they're in. But
nobody's ever happy in a Woody Allen movie. All right, I think you're the right age for it. Backstreet Boys or NSYNC?
I guess NSYNC. I never listen to either one of them.
Really?
I mean, I'm cool.
Oh, I'm not cool. I've never been cool. All right. Ben and Jerry's comes to you and they say that they would like to make an ice cream flavor based on you. What do you want to call it? What do you want to call it and what do you put in it?
Okay.
It can be sugar-free.
It's going to be called Rude's Awakening, because Rude is my nickname. And it's going to have mint. It's going to be like a mint chocolate, some kind of a mint chocolate thing. Maybe with, can you put salt in there? I
Yes.
want like a mint chocolate, a salty mint chocolate Girl Scout cookie kind of a thing.
Okay. Like a salted caramel thin mint.
Yes, that's what I want.
Ooh, that sounds good. Little chunks of thin mint in there.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Great answer. Love it. Last but not least, you're having a rough day. You need to change your mindset, get yourself into a positive frame of mind. What is your go-to music?
Probably, I mean, Belle and Sebastian. I don't know if you know them, but
I
that's
do know,
one of my.
but that's not what I think about for like feel good music. But
It makes me feel good because it's very nostalgic. It's something I've loved for a long time. So like if I'm listening to Belle and Sebastian, I'm either really happy or I'm really sad.
yeah, for sure, it brings you back to like a time and place and that feeling of that era.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. I'm that way with punk rock. People find, it's like loud and it's abrasive, but it makes me feel joy and like nostalgia. Right.
Same.
Awesome. So as I mentioned, we're coming towards the end of our time, so I would like to thank you, first of all, for taking time out of your day to be on the show. I was going to say with us, but with me. And this is the part of the show where I just kind of give you the floor to feel free to let everybody know where to find you, anything you've got coming up, and any last parting words you'd like to leave to our audience.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful talking to you, and I just appreciate what you are doing for the recovery and people out there who are considering this lifestyle. So Killjoy, you can follow us on Instagram at Killjoy Nash. We try to be funny and do things like April Fool's jokes. We have a good time on there. So definitely follow us there. We will have our podcast coming hopefully within the next month. And that's going to be called Killjoy After Party, talking about people's lives after alcohol and how much fun they are. And we're going to make people sing songs. So that's our Nashville twist. John, who's my partner, he's a songwriter. So it's going to be fun stories of life after alcohol and singing. So we are very excited about that. Check that out. We have a lot of events coming up. If you check our website, it's killjoyclub.com, or you can look on our Eventbrite. But we have our 1-year anniversary tasting market is this Saturday. I don't know when this is airing. So I feel
Not before Saturday.
Don't need to get too far into that. All right. But thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So again, thank you so much for your time, for coming on the show. We loved having you. It was a great conversation. And to our viewers at home, whether you're watching, streaming, listening, wherever you find us, please don't forget to like, share, follow, give a review. If you drive Uber, make all your Uber passengers listen to this podcast. And as we like to say here, there's 1,000 ways in and there's 1,000 ways out. And we hope you find yours.